people who believe that they have a God-given right to rule over others. They believe that their outward appearance is superior to all others. They harbor selfish ambitions to be rich and to have power over what they describe as common people. They lie, cheat, steal, strangle, stab and slash their way to power. They believe that their actual willpower, what the British occultist Aleister Crowley described as the will of Thelema, the royal will, must be obeyed. Literally millions of people have been slaughtered at the behest of the royal lust for war, and thousands of people have been assassinated so that demonic dukes and killer queens can reign supreme. This cabal of crowned killers use the global network of secret societies, loosely described as the Illuminati, to do their bidding and killing. The conspiratorial view of history is the correct view of history. Conspiracy to grab property, conspiracy to make illegal profits, and conspiracy to assassinate has been the driving force behind the royal political elite for thousands of years. Many people believe that conspiracy in world politics simply does not exist. But it is a provable fact that the royal political elite have committed murder to gain power over and over again throughout the ages. Many of these murders were the result of a conspiracy usually orchestrated by politicians and aristocrats serving members of royal families. The Roman Emperor Julius Caesar was stabbed to death on the Ides of March. This was a conspiracy. US President Abraham Lincoln was shot at point-blank range by a distant relative of the British Prime Minister's wife, William Booth. This was a conspiracy. Every November the 5th, the gunpowder plot is celebrated. Guy Fawkes planned to explode a bomb beneath the Houses of Parliament. This was a conspiracy. In recent times, we have seen the last truly popular president of the United States, Mr. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, assassinated. This was a conspiracy. According to Muhammad al-Fayed, Princess Diana was the latest victim of a royal conspiracy in which she was allegedly murdered under orders from the British royal family. History teaches us that the royal elite have killed before, and it is most likely that they will kill again. Many people believe that capital punishment, usually in the form of hanging, is no longer permitted in Britain. This is not so. The royal family still reserve the right to prosecute and then hang someone if found guilty of treason. Treason, in its most harmless form, is simply criticism of the royal family. A more serious form of treason would be to conspire, just as Guy Fawkes did, to attack the very heart of the royal political establishment. And another serious form of treason would be to accuse the royal family of murder and thus turn public opinion against the monarchy, possibly resulting in the dethronement of the royals. This film does commit treason, but it is the truth. History tells us that the German impostors who occupy the British throne have consistently tortured, illegally imprisoned, and even murdered, sometimes with their own hands, people who have criticized the monarchy throughout history. This film, for the first time ever, exposes the murderous and, in some cases, downright satanic activities of the monarchy. Let it begin. For the crowned killers of Europe, torture, disemboweling, hanging, burning, strangling, poisoning, and killing in the most satanic manner is the order of the day. This is the modus operandi of royal families. For centuries, the royal elite have devised terrible punishments for anyone accused of treason. The monarchy reserved the most disgusting forms of torture and death for those who questioned the royal will. A so-called traitor would often have each arm and leg tied to 4 horses, which were whipped to gallop in opposite directions, thus ripping the victim into 4 parts, whilst still alive. Often, the royal elite would divide the victim's heart into sections and send these for public display to different parts of the country as a macabre warning. The British throne has been bathed in blood for centuries. At one time, Britain contained several small kingdoms. These small kingdoms, ruled over by an intermarried, self-elected elite, were gradually amalgamated into the single monarchy which rules over Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and secretly controls the United States of America. As each decade dawned, the most ruthless, cunning, and murderous monarchs assassinated the regional kings and seized their property. Over history, the most heartless, cruel, disgusting, dishonest, and psychopathic royal family would triumph, eventually establishing a global empire where ordinary people are crippled with taxes demanded by a monarchy living on the other side of the planet. The so-called British Empire, which at one time included Hong Kong and India, was created by blade and bullet. The so-called royal family which triumphed is basically German. They are seated on almost every throne in Europe. They are the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha-Battenberg bloodline, which often intermarries with the Hesse-Kassel German nobility and claim Jewish descent from the royal house of David in ancient Israel. They raise their children without love or compassion, breeding each successive generation to be at the head of a military establishment who keep an angered peace by use of fear, surveillance, and war. By the 1600s, the thrones of Europe were mostly occupied by Germans, which had super wealth, earning vast profits from peasant labor, outright slavery, and the international opium trade. This Germanic family, known as the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, the Schleswig-Holsteins, the Habsburgs, Romanovs, and House of Kassel-Hesse, shared the same tiny genetic bloodline. This can clearly be seen in a photograph of the British King George V standing beside Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Queen Victoria is considered the most British of all queens. Her husband was German, and she wrote letters of state in German. Contrary to what the royal spin doctors have written in the school history books, Queen Victoria was not popular. She was often hissed in public, and there were no less than 7 attempts to kill her. Keeping the populace ignorant, using adults and children alike as virtual slaves in workhouses, providing no adequate protection against hypothermia, working every man and woman to exhaustion, and imposing a crippling poll tax was the modus operandi of Queen Victoria and all her relatives sitting on the thrones across Europe. So-called Victorian values allowed children to be used as slave labor. Inhumane slums and widespread poverty was common across the whole of Europe right up until the 1970s. Even now, in the 21st century, large numbers of British people live in concrete boxes without adequate education, and therefore unable to find a profession to lift themselves out of poverty. There are as many homeless people in Europe today as there were 50 years ago. Today's royal family is in power due to the bloody, horrible, murdering activities of their forefathers. By the second half of the 16th century, the major bloodlines which sit on the thrones of Britain and Europe today were already established. One of the most vicious crowned killers was Tsar Ivan IV of Russia. His mother fell foul of one of the most common forms of royal assassination. She died of poisoning when Tsar Ivan was just 8 years old. The young Tsar took great advantage of his royal will, what Aleister Crowley described as the royal thelema, a Greek word for willpower. All monarchs can exert their will and decree any act, even murder and rape, and act above the law. When he was just 9 years old, Tsar Ivan started torturing animals. This is a practice which is continued in ritual form amongst initiates of the Ordo Templi Orientis, a secret Masonic academy previously headed by Aleister Crowley. By the age of 10, Ivan, Tsar of Russia, would personally oversee the torturing of so-called political prisoners. These were people who had merely been critical of his power. He committed his first rape at the age of 11. He was crowned in 1547 and diverted public attention away from their own abject poverty by entering into war with Poland and Lithuania. Tsar Ivan took thousands of prisoners and personally supervised their torture, often devising the most wicked torture techniques himself. Tsar Ivan positively relished the screams of people as they had their eyes torn out. Women and even children were disemboweled, mauled by wild bears for his amusement, and people had parts of their bodies cut off and fed to his dogs whilst they roasted alive on a spit. Ivan also threw children into freezing lakes and rivers, and by 1569 he had extended his royal fortunes and property, with 60,000 people having been brutally murdered, many by his own hands. One of the most popular secret societies in Victorian London was the Golden Dawn. Amongst its membership taking part in magical ceremonies was the author Bram Stoker. His most famous novel is Dracula. The vampirish nature of royal killers is renowned throughout history. Bram Stoker studied the career of psychopath Prince Vlad Dracul, who ruled Wallachia in the 15th century. Dracul means dragon. Prince Vlad was initiated into the royal court of the dragon by his father, which launched the young prince on a bloodthirsty sadistic career which saw him employ every form of torture and even force political prisoners to eat each other. Prince Vlad took the greatest sadistic pleasure in watching women eat parts of their own children, or husbands eating their own wives. Every British and European monarchy has a history of murder by a brother, cousin, or wife. Even royal mothers have killed their own children. King William II of England was murdered by his own brother, who became King Henry I. In her fascinating book, God of the Witches, published in 1933, historian Margaret Murray revealed that King William II was a pagan warlock and had most probably been murdered as part of a ritual sacrifice to nature spirits who were invoked in order to assist the wicked royal dynasty of Britain. Pagan holidays, such as the equinox and solstice, play an important role in the royal calendar. In fact, the current heir to the British throne, Prince William, the son of the murdered Princess Diana, was cut from Diana's womb on the summer solstice, a date which has important occult significance. The reason given for the caesarean surgical birth was that William was delivered timely, so that Prince Charles would not have his royal engagements disrupted by the prince's birth. One of Prince Charles's royal antecedents was the cruel Angevin dynasty. Their offspring sat on the thrones of England and also ruled the illegally captured kingdom of Jerusalem. One of the counts of Anjou returned from the Crusades with a new wife. The so-called Crusades were perpetrated with the assistance of the Knights Templar. Thousands of Islamic men, women and children were tortured and butchered whilst the Knights Templar ransacked holy places and slaughtered in the name of Christ. They were searching for ancient Kabbalistic texts whilst practicing a form of black magic, invoking spirits according to the teachings of King Solomon. Some Templars eventually confessed that rituals were often held where spirits were invoked and commanded to speak through shrunken, severed heads, called Baphomets. The Count of Anjou returned to Europe with a mysterious wife he had met during the Crusades. She was crowned Queen Melusine and became known as the Devil's Daughter. Her children seeded the famous Angevin monarchy of Europe, who became famous for their violent tempers. One descendant of Melusine, the Devil's Daughter, was King Henry II of England, who imprisoned his own wife for many years. King Henry also murdered his own Archbishop, Mr. Thomas Becket. King Henry's son was the wicked King John, who became famous through the legend of Robin Hood. King John of England had his own nephew murdered on the anniversary of an old pagan holiday called Maundy Thursday. King John was a professional psychopath, ordering by decree the murder of hundreds of people. In May 1194, he had 300 prisoners beheaded in an orgy of blood. In the year 1212, a number with significant occult associations, he personally oversaw the hanging of 28 young boys in Wales. One of the most disgusting double murders at the hands of British royalty befell the young Princes Edward and Richard, who were imprisoned and eventually stabbed to death by order of King Richard III in 1483. psychics, such as the Dr. Nostradamus, were employed by the French monarchy. Nostradamus was a skilled scryer, staring endlessly into bowls of water until the reflected light was manipulated by spirits who foretold future events. Dr. Nostradamus wrote a book of prophecies called Centuries, which was published in 1555. He describes events from the mid-1500s through to the end of the world, which is predicted to come in the year 3797. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, asked him to plot the horoscopes of her husband, King Henry II. In 1560, King Charles IX of France appointed Nostradamus as his court physician. Nostradamus accurately predicted for the French Queen, Catherine de' Medici, the death of her own children and other information which was used to bolster the monarch's hold over the peasant population of France. Magicians and mediums who consult with spirits have always been employed by the royal elite. In medieval Britain, Dr. John Dee was consulted regularly by Queen Elizabeth I. At the British Museum in London, we see the dark mirror which John Dee used to see or scry the faces of spirits. Dee's ability to communicate with spirits led him to be employed as a spy, developing psychic espionage techniques, which we now call remote viewing. John Dee attended Trinity College in Cambridge, which became a place where occultists and the world of spies were intertwined. Aleister Crowley also attended Trinity College. In 1904, he wrote an introduction to an ancient book of spells called the Goetia. Soon after, Aleister Crowley followed the footsteps of John Dee and worked as a spy for Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service, MI5. In medieval Britain, anyone found communicating with spirits was in danger of being arrested by the many inquisitions organized by the Vatican. The costumes and wickedness of the Vatican's inquisitions would later be copied by the Ku Klux Klan in the United States, who used the so-called Earth Salute, which was originally devised by members of the Victorian secret society known as the Golden Dawn. Hitler would also use the same salute and drop millions of leaflets quoting the prophecies of Nostradamus across Europe during his attempt in the 1940s to create a global Nazi superstate. the Vatican has issued 3 papal bulls against Freemasonry and the magical rituals of the craft. Many Catholics have also expressed doubt over the Hebrew science of spirit communication known as the Kabbalah. However, disregarding the warnings of the Pope, medieval monarchs across Europe ignored Vatican law and employed the services of Kabbalists, astrologers and magicians, whilst being protected from prosecution by their power and wealth. Dr. John Dee was secretly initiated into the secrets of the Kabbalah by Rabbi Lowe in the 1500s. The Kabbalah offers a route map which is called the Tree of Life. Discarnate spirits, some angelic, some evil, occupy each point on the Tree of Life. These spirits can be called forth and invoked to serve the magician. Medieval astrologers and Kabbalists such as John Dee were hired by monarchs to plan their wars, or to experiment with alchemy, trying to transform base metals into gold and thus increase the already spectacular wealth of the monarchy. When a British monarch is crowned, an elaborate ceremony takes place which resembles the ritual crowning of King Solomon of ancient Israel. King Solomon ruled over ancient Israel and had extensive knowledge of the Kabbalah, which he used to communicate with demons.
As King Solomon was anointed king, the priest known as Zadok and the prophet known as Nathan, so thou be anointed, blessed and consecrated, queen over all the people.
King Solomon is the single most important figure in the occult teachings of world international Freemasonry. The ancient Goetia is a book of powerful invocations and spells written by King Solomon. These ancient spells and evocations were used to summon spirits who were then psychically tortured and forced to serve King Solomon. The Goetia contains descriptions of 72 demons, some of whom control their own army of lesser demons. King Solomon evoked and imprisoned these spirits in a bronze vessel sealed using magic symbols. The Goetia explains how the spirits can be compelled into obedience. The Goetia describes a demonic royal hierarchy of spirits, many of which are referred to as knights, princes, and kings. King Solomon ruled ancient Israel from the year 970 to 928 BC. Satanists, occultists, and Freemasons worldwide venerate the memory of King Solomon, who owned a magic ring engraved with a symbol called the Seal of Solomon. This gave him power over the invisible monarchy of demons. This Seal of Solomon is better known as the Star of David. It is this symbol which is encoded into the $1 bill. It is also the flag of Israel. This symbol, which was used to invoke and control Asmodeus, one of the senior spirit kings in the infernal monarchy of hell. Well, David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, is one of my all-time favourite books. There is a section in there talking about a character called Pindar, who apparently is the boss of some of these satanic councils or satanic groups in America, and he also attends rituals in Europe. And according to some of the sources which David Icke used for his book, Pindar, this character, is otherwise known as the Marquis de Lebu, or the Marquis of Lebu. So there is a section in the book saying, you know, can you give us any more information? And David Icke requests the reader, you know, if you've got any information, then come forward. Now, a good friend of mine actually wrote a book called The Way of the Dragon, and it's an excellent book. It's all in French, and I have French grandparents, so it's quite easy for me to be able to research ancient French documents. Now, Lebu was suggested to me by my friend as possibly being an anagram of the old French term, which is Bilu or Biliou. Now, Biliou is a plural of the word Belial, and Belial means demon, and Biliou is an old French term for the plural, which is demons. So if Libu is an anagram of Bilu, and I believe it is, this man is attending the satanic councils. Apparently he arrives in a white Rolls Royce or some white limousine. And he calls himself the Marquis of Demons, or the Marquis of Demons. Now that's absolutely fascinating, because many of the 72 spirits which we see described in the Howling, the Book of Howling, otherwise known as the Goetia, it's also known as the Book of Shadows. Many of the 72 spirits there, you've got all these instructions of how to summon these spirits. Many of them are marquises. Many of them are dukes, presidents, kings. I would say probably around a quarter of them have a rank of marquis or equivalent to a marquis. And if you conjure these spirits using the information which you find in the Goetia and also in other medieval grimoires, you will see that in your mind's eye these spirits often appear riding dragons or griffins, or they hold serpents in their hands, and at your command they will take the form of a human being. At the magician's command they will take the form of a human. But if you look at the sketches which have been used to illustrate many different versions of the Goetia, you will see that many of these spirits are they have royal rank, like a marquis or an earl or a duke, king, and there is definitely reptilian symbology, and if you command the spirit to take on a human form, it will do, and it will shapeshift. So I think there's many parallels with my research into the medieval grimoires and the Goetia, which dates back probably to Sumeria and Babylon, and the research which is presented in The Biggest Secret, which is one of my all-time favourite books. Asmodeus, who often appears as a classic devil creature, can be found inside the church of Rennes-le-Château in the Languedoc region of southern France. This church was transformed into a Kabbalistic temple masquerading as an ordinary village church in the 1880s by Abbé Saunière, who discovered documents from King Solomon's temple stashed inside the altar. To this very day, the British coronation is a bastardized version of the actual coronation ritual of King Solomon. King Solomon and his magical temple are the central foundation stone of world international Freemasonry. The Masonic rituals are designed to invoke a magical atmosphere in the lodge. Millions of Freemasons meet every week at lodges all over the planet, all venerating and singing hymns to King Solomon and spirits. Since the Dark Ages, misguided, selfish individuals have joined various cults such as the OTO, the Knights Templar, and Freemasonry in order to study different elements of ritual, blood oaths, and a form of the Kabbalah. The upper levels of Freemasonry require the initiate to memorize dozens of pages of text written in Hebrew and study symbols used in the Goetia to invoke spirits. The Templars and Masons have been led by senior royals since the beginning. The Masonic network provides the monarchy with an invisible worldwide cabal who have sworn allegiance to the monarchy and their Masonic demon god known as Yabulon. The entity known as Baal is named by King Solomon as the most senior spirit in the infernal royal hierarchy of demons. Masons swear never to divulge each other's secrets. Also, never to criticize a fellow Mason, even if he be guilty of murder. This provides the monarchy with a global army of Freemasons willing to do their service in secret to the crown. To the British royals of the Middle Ages, murder by magic was accepted as fact. Queen Elizabeth I and King Henry VIII ruled Britain at a time when the black arts of witchcraft and poisoning were inseparably linked. Across Europe, the monarchy was involved with one murder after another. Many deaths attributed to a form of black magic, often perpetrated by someone within the royal court. In 1388, the Queen of Aragon was accused of the attempted murder of her own son by using witchcraft. In 1419, Jeanne of Navarre, the widow of King Henry IV, tried using magical spells to kill her stepson, Henry V. Jeanne of Navarre was convicted on evidence offered by her chaplain. Further revelations exposed the fact that witchcraft was being practiced right at the very heart of the royal court of England. Like the Kabbalist magicians, witches were also sometimes employed by the monarchy. Medieval witches would often make wax figurines resembling the likeness of the intended victim. The doll would then be tortured and burnt, often causing ill effects on the victims. It is claimed that this technique can induce an early death by heart attack or disease. King Alfred recognized the tendency for royals and noblemen to use witchcraft and imposed the death sentence for anyone practicing the black arts. However, his law went unheeded. By the late Middle Ages, satanic black masses were attended by royals and aristocrats in Vienna, Paris, Venice, and London. King Henry VIII came to the throne knowing that psychics, magicians, and mystics with knowledge of necromancy had been on permanent employment with the royal court. In 1538, Mabel Brigg was executed in York for trying to kill Henry VIII using the so-called Black Fast, where the sorcerer performs a hunger strike inside a magic circle whilst directing the wrath of spirits against the victim. In 1429, it was disclosed through letters written by Jean of Navarre that she was a member of a coven of witches which operated right in the heart of the English royal court. One of her fellow witches was the wife of one of her stepsons, Eleanor Cobham, who was married to Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. Eleanor Cobham was arrested on the 25th of June 1441 at the King's Head Tavern in Cheapside, London, and stood trial for witchcraft. Her husband was the heir to the British throne. Another royal witch was soon exposed, the Duchess Jacquette of St. Pol, who was married to another brother of Henry V. She stood in a witchcraft tribunal which heard evidence suggesting that she had ensured her daughter's marriage using talismans and black magic. A frenzy of satanic ritual was eventually exposed at the heart of the royal courts of Britain and France by several 19th century historians. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France, performed several satanic black masses for the benefit of the royal aristocratic elite. French author Jean Baudin wrote a book about witchcraft recounting that in the 1600s Catherine Monvoisin and the priest Etienne Guibourg performed black masses for the mistress of the King of France. The Black Mass is a satanic parody of the Roman Catholic Mass, often involving the ritual murder of a virgin. Aleister Crowley wrote extensively about ritual sacrifice and recommended that a child under the age of 9 of above average intelligence made the ideal sacrificial victim. Much to the horror of the 17th century royal elite, Etienne Guibourg publicly confessed that the mistress of King Louis XIV of France, Madame de Montespan, would lie naked upon a satanic altar with a chalice of wine infused with intoxicating herbs on her bare stomach. She would hold 2 black candles in each of her outstretched hands. The royal Black Mass, combined with a family tradition of cruelty and outright evil, would be continued into the 1700s by the aristocrat known as the Marquis de Sade. The de Sade family were members of France's oldest nobility. The Marquis de Sade repeatedly abused young prostitutes in his castle at Lacoste in France. He wrote about pornographic orgies and ritualized sexual beatings involving monks, priests, and even the Pope himself. Sade avoided a prison sentence by claiming insanity and spent most of his life in a comfortable mental asylum. In the asylum, the Marquis de Sade immediately began an affair with a 13-year-old girl called Madeleine Leclerc. Sade died in 1814. His death marked a new era of Satanism and murder at the royal courts of Britain, France, and Russia. Witch hunts of the Middle Ages took place all over Europe and even in the United States of America. However, witch hunts in the Russian Imperial Empire were much more rare. To this very day, a huge number of Russian people are attributed with psychic power. In the 19th century, the Russian Romanov royal family employed a powerful hypnotist and mystic. He has become known as the Mad Monk Grigory Rasputin. The story of Rasputin exemplifies the psychopathic nature of the monarchy. Rasputin was a self-styled monk and therefore had friends in the Russian Orthodox Church. Rasputin had endured poverty, giving him the common touch with the peasant population of Russia. He was revered as someone who could heal, therefore bringing him notoriety across the vast empire of Imperial Russia. Rasputin was also someone who could entertain the company of royalty. Rasputin was seen as a threat by the Romanov royal dynasty. Grigory Rasputin may have actually become Russia's first truly popular leader had he not been poisoned and murdered by one of the royal princes. Born in 1869, the mystical Grigory Rasputin could engage himself in an intense trance where he prophesied future events. His psychic healing powers were employed by Tsar Nicholas and Queen Alexandra. Rasputin used his famous healing hands to cure the Tsar's son. Once the royal Romanov dynasty saw the immense power of Rasputin, they quickly realized that a popular revolt may elevate Rasputin to be the leader of a new Russian republic. The Romanov royal family immediately plotted the murder of Rasputin. However, Rasputin's psychic powers allowed him to prophesy his own death, and he gave warning to Tsar Nicholas that if he were to murder Rasputin, then the whole Romanov royal family would also be killed. On New Year's Eve 1916, Prince Felix Yusupov invited Rasputin to the Moika Palace in St. Petersburg. The prince gave Rasputin poisoned food. However, Rasputin showed no sign of dying. Prince Felix panicked and rushed out of the palace to consult Grand Duke Dmitri. The Duke and Prince returned with a gun and shot Rasputin at point-blank range. A palace doctor was called who could find no sign of life in the body of Rasputin. However, suddenly, Rasputin regained consciousness, and the prince and the duke ran for the outer gate of the palace and called for armed troops to finish off Rasputin. Rasputin chased the duke and prince. The crowned prince took a club and hit Rasputin repeatedly over the head in a typically psychopathic royal temper. Palace guards were ordered to wrap Rasputin in a heavy curtain, and he was then lowered to his death in the icy cold River Neva. Thus, the Russian people lost one of their truly great potential leaders. Soon after, a bloodbath would take place in Imperial Russia, and the dictatorial, cruel system of the Romanov monarchy would be continued by a fake revolutionary communist government who secretly took their orders from the royal political elite. Descendants of the Russian monarchy and aristocracy now rule Russia from behind the scenes, having introduced the same system of globalization and stock markets which the royal elite have used to ensnare the economies of most countries on the face of planet Earth. Perhaps the most cruel and bloodthirsty homicides ever perpetrated in Britain were the so-called Jack the Ripper murders, which occurred in East London during 1888. This was more than just murder. The so-called Jack the Ripper murders were ritual bloodbaths. The victims were slaughtered according to the oaths of loyalty sworn by members of the Masonic religion. Now, for the first time on film, we can reveal the truth about Jack the Ripper. Diaries written by Inspector Aberline of Scotland Yard at the time of the Ripper murders have been held in safekeeping by Joseph Sickert, whose father was an artist who gave art lessons to Prince Albert Victor, the heir to the throne of the British Empire in the 19th century. Prince Albert Victor was known as Prince Eddie. He was the son of Queen Alexandra and the grandson of Queen Victoria. During the last 120 years, royal spin doctors have led the public to believe that Queen Victoria was popular. She was not. Often hissed in public, Queen Victoria was a German, and so was her husband. They were great supporters and patrons of World International Freemasonry. Queen Victoria's son became King Edward VII. He was King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, King of the Commonwealth Realms, and the Emperor of India. He was the first British monarch to carry the name of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha onto the throne. Edward VII was part of the Germanic royal dynasty which had sponsored the writing career of Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit who had formed the Bavarian Illuminati in the 1770s. The Bavarian Illuminati infiltrated the upper echelons of Freemasonry, preaching a secret doctrine of a new world order, a global superstate where compassion and democracy would have no place. Since the 1700s, the Bavarian Illuminati has fragmented into an invisible global network of secret societies, which includes the infamous Skull and Bones fraternity at Yale University in the United States. Adam Weishaupt's doctrine of a new world order was laid out in 3 books which he wrote in the later years of his life. He lived in the town of Gotha, and his writing career was funded by the Saxe-Coburg dynasty, who came to the British throne through Edward VII. Edward VII was installed as Grand Master of British Freemasonry in 1875. He regularly appeared in public wearing the ceremonial uniform of a Masonic Grand Master. Like his Saxe-Coburg grandparents, King Edward VII was one of the biggest financial contributors to the Illuminati version of Freemasonry. He was crowned in 1901. Masonic lodges existed in several royal palaces, most notably in Kensington Palace, which was home to the Royal Alpha Lodge. It was here, in 1885, that King Edward VII initiated his own son, Prince Albert Victor, better known as Prince Eddie. Prince Eddie was genetically handicapped. Generation after generation of inbreeding within the Saxe-Coburg bloodline had resulted in Prince Eddie, the heir to the throne, being partially deaf. With typical cruelty, most of the royal family had no time for a partially deaf person, and Eddie's brother was groomed instead to take the throne after Edward VII died. Along with the great and the good of Victorian and Edwardian society, Prince Eddie spent much of his time enjoying himself at the taxpayers' expense in various brothels. Prince Eddie was a regular visitor of a homosexual paedophile brothel in Cleveland Street, London. Alistair Crowley, who claims to have been a member of the 1591 Studholme Masonic Lodge and also a visitor to the Royal Alpha Lodge at Kensington Palace, was in possession of love letters between Prince Eddie and a young boy at the brothel. This was a potential scandal for the heir to the throne, but the aristocracy supported the idea of paedophilia at the time. In fact, there was a revolt in the House of Lords when the age of consent was raised from 12 to 13 years of age. In fact, a much bigger scandal was soon to break, when it was revealed that Prince Eddie had made a young girl called Annie Crook pregnant. Prince Eddie had secretly married her, even though he was forbidden to marry a Roman Catholic. Officially, This meant that he would not be able to become king. In 1884, the Pope had condemned the satanic nature of Freemasonry, and the royal political elite split into two factions, one Catholic and anti-Masonic, and the other Protestant, fiercely guarding the real power behind the throne, which was World International Freemasonry. Prince Eddie had secretly married a Catholic, and that was a form of treason. It infuriated powerful Freemasons. Mixed with a potent dash of royal paedophilia and Aleister Crowley's collection of homosexual love letters between the prince and a young boy, the British establishment was facing perhaps the biggest scandal ever to have rocked the monarchy. They decided to do what the monarchy has always done: stage a massive cover-up operation. In 1885, Annie Crook was kidnapped from the sweet shop where she worked, and simultaneously Prince Eddie was forced into a carriage which galloped away in the opposite direction. It was the last the young newlywed couple ever saw of each other. Prince Eddie was taken back to Buckingham Palace and strictly forbidden to leave the premises. Annie Crook was illegally incarcerated at Guy's Hospital, where one of Queen Victoria's doctors, the wicked Sir William Gull, picked some of her brain out with tweezers, turning her into a mentally retarded, pathetic shadow of her former self. However, Annie Crook had told several friends about her marriage to the young prince. Annie had just given birth to a baby, a bastard heir to the British throne. Dr. William Gull kept Annie Crook imprisoned for 156 days in Guy's Hospital, and then sent her and her baby to workhouses where they were used as slave labor. One of Annie's friends, a young girl called Mary Kelly, worked part-time as a prostitute at Whitechapel in East London. Mary Kelly and a group of her friends decided to write a blackmail letter demanding money from the royal family. The year was 1888. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn had been formed the same year. Freemasons marched in full ceremonial regalia in public. The Bavarian Illuminati had splintered into a secret society inside another secret society. All the thrones of Europe were occupied by royal Masons. What Mary Kelly and her group of friends had not counted on is that not only were they trying to blackmail royal Masons, they were blackmailing psychopathic crowned killers who would prefer to kill rather than give over a single penny of their wealth. The occult powers behind the throne convened a special meeting at the Royal Alpha Lodge in Kensington Palace. This elite group of Masons called themselves Princes of the Blood Royal. And they decided to form a ruthless hunting party which would hunt down and ritually murder Mary Kelly and her friends, thus putting an end to the blackmail attempt. Sir Charles Warren, a senior Freemason and head of the Metropolitan Police, provided intelligence on the whereabouts of Mary Kelly and her female friends. Sir William Gull prepared grapes injected with opium and alcohol, which would be offered to the girls. John Netley, a ruffian coach driver who worked for several aristocrats, would supply transportation. And J.K. Stephen, a socialite of Victorian London, would act as a lookout whilst the ritualized murders would take place inside Netley's horse-drawn carriage. According to the diaries of Inspector Aberline of Scotland Yard, diaries which were sealed in wax and held in safekeeping by the Victorian Impressionist painter and friend of Prince Eddie, William Sickert, the so-called Jack the Ripper murders were not the work of one crazy individual. These were meticulously planned ritual murders conducted in the Masonic tradition by a large group of aristocrats who hunted the young female victims rather like a country expedition killing foxes. So who was the leader of the Jack the Ripper gang? None other than one of Britain and Ireland's most senior Freemasons, the son of a duke, member of Her Majesty's Privy Council, an Oxford graduate, a Justice of the Peace, Secretary of State for India, Member of Parliament for South Paddington in London, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Leader of the House of Commons in the British Parliament, friend of King Edward VII, and Mason Magister Majestic Magistorium of the Orange Order in Ireland, future father of Britain's most famous Prime Minister. The leader of the Jack the Ripper gang was Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill. It was Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill who sliced Masonic emblems into the faces of the victims. It was he who coordinated the so-called Jack the Ripper murders. And this film puts an end to a 120-year cover-up by the royal political elite of Great Britain. Until the young Lady Diana Spencer became Princess of Wales, Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill was the most famous member in the history of the Spencer aristocratic family. Her Royal Highness Princess Diana was herself a Spencer, a family which has served the monarchy for generations. She is distantly related to Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill, Jack the Ripper, and his son, Winston Churchill. Randolph Spencer Churchill was no stranger to the occult. He ripped and slashed the victims, slicing Masonic symbols into their faces. According to Masonic instruction, the internal organs of the victims were torn out and trailed over their left shoulder. For these murders were ritual sacrifices, a public warning to anyone who was considering to commit treason. In his characteristic manner, Aleister Crowley soon left Britain after the Jack the Ripper murders. The love letters between Prince Eddie and the young boy prostitute never surfaced in the public domain. J.K. Stephen, one of the aristocratic gang of murderers, was so ashamed and shocked by the ritual psychopathic behavior of Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill that he made his confession to Inspector Abberline at Scotland Yard. Of course, there were no arrests. In fact, Scotland Yard still, to this day, take great care to cover up the true significance and detail of the Jack the Ripper Masonic murders. When author Stephen Knight was given access to the Ripper file at Scotland Yard, he found that many important documents had been deliberately lost. Stephen Knight discovered later that some of the documents he had seen during his research for his book, Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution, had subsequently been destroyed. Soon after the publication of Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution, and also after having exposed the true nature of demonic Freemasonry in his excellent book called The Brotherhood, Stephen Knight was dead.
Now, what Diana says, again in her own words, is that she was told when the birth of William was coming along, that she was going to be induced so that the child would be born, wait for this, in line with Charles's polo playing program. Now, first of all, even if that was true, which it wasn't, what does that say about a father that would have an induced child so it would suit his polo playing program? But what was the real story? If you go back to ancient Babylon and the rituals of these people, they're fundamentally connected to the sun and the cycles of the sun. Nimrod, Baal, the sun god. And one of the key days of the year in their ritual calendar, therefore, is the summer solstice. They induced William to be born when? The summer solstice. And this is what's going on around us all the time. There's a movie, which that television is telling us is reality. And then there's what's really going on, which is so different. That's its greatest form of defense. The chasm that people have to leap between what they are told is happening and what's really happening. A confidant, Christian Fitzgerald, told me that people who did not support these black occult networks that controlling not just Britain but increasingly the world, they were feeding her information and warning her that she was in danger. What keeps this whole thing from coming out, and has done for us all this time, and indeed the wider conspiracy too, is that to understand it you have to research so many different subjects and then fit the strands together before you go, wow, so that's what it's all about. In this soundbite world of superficiality we call the mainstream media, people get so little information that they can't see what's going on. So when you look at the story of Diana, it's not just about what's happening now, what happened in 97. It's also going back again to Babylon and places like that. The goddess Diana was an ancient goddess, which was another name for the Babylonian goddess Queen Semiramis, the goddess of the Illuminati. And one of the groups of people that worshipped Diana, the goddess, and did their rituals to her were called the Merovingians. The Merovingians are one of the, if not the, key bloodline in the whole Illuminati network. They were the royal line of a people called at one stage the Cambrian Franks, which is where we get France from, that came out of the time of the Trojan Wars in now what we now call Turkey, up through the Caucasus Mountains and into what we now call France. Eventually, their royal strand, the Merovingians, were what the whole people became known as. And they were great goddess Diana worshippers. And according to an American researcher in Paris, immediately after Diana died, the Merovingians dug underground sacrificial chambers in Paris, just outside the original Paris, well inside, of course, the present metropolis, where they did their rituals to the goddess Diana. And according to her, the place is now called the Pont d'Alma Tunnel, which is still an underground kind of location. Now, the ancient myths of the goddess Diana were that she was a moon goddess. Pont d'Alma actually translates as passage or bridge of the moon goddess. Coincidence? Why is it with the absolutely, I cannot emphasize this enough, the ritual symbolism obsessed Illuminati, why is it that even people who said, well, it was an accident, have actually said, well, there is one question. Why was Diana held in that tunnel for so long when she's supposed to have had internal bleeding which needed repairing? Why not get her to hospital immediately? Why was she held in that tunnel for the best part of an hour and a half? Why? Because in the sick ritual, and that's what it was, the ritual of her murder, she had to die in that place of ancient sacrifice to the goddess Diana. And it was when she died that they then moved her out. And of course, goodness knows what have happened to her internal organs, because this is what these sick people use in their rituals. Interestingly, when you look at the stories and myths surrounding the goddess Diana, over and over again, the theme of lakes, of islands, and particularly of the tree grove come up again and again and again. It was the tree grove that was the sacred place of worship to the goddess Diana, not a temple. Now, she wanted to be interned in the little church where her father is, just off the Spencer estate in Northamptonshire. And after her death, Earl Spencer says that he decided that she would be buried on the Spencer estate. Where? On an island, in a lake, in a tree grove. And there's also this bizarre story where Earl Spencer says that he had this dream that he had to put 4 black swans on the lake. And he then said to his estate manager, I've had this dream. Do you know where we can get 4 black swans from? And the estate manager said, well, sir, funnily enough, someone's just offered us 4. Oh, yeah, okay. I've seen a pig. Never mind a bloody swan. Look, there it goes.
Black swans are an occult symbol, aren't they?
Exactly. The whole thing's a cult. And the whole of Diana's assassination was an occult ritual unfolding. Now, what's kind of interesting to me is that when I was researching The Biggest Secret, which I wrote in 1998, which is kind of unfolding now before our eyes, one of the people that I was introduced to was a lady called Christine Fitzgerald, who, as the tabloid media in Britain acknowledged, was a close confidant of Princess Diana for 9 years. They fell out a little while before her death, but for 9 years they were big time close. And Christine Fitzgerald is a hands-on alternative healer and into the esoteric, and therefore Diana could talk to her about things that other people would think, you know, oh, that Diana's mad, she's talking about this, that and the other now. And I had long conversations with Christine Fitzgerald about the background to Diana and things that she experienced with her. And I had to have a wry smile to myself when the Paul Burrell revelations came out, because much of it was told to me years ago and is in The Biggest Secret. Not least that friendly people from organizations like MI5 were actually feeding Diana information, saying, you know, be very, very careful because they want rid of you. And so when Burrell produced this letter from Diana in which she predicted her own death in a car crash, in effect, it absolutely fits with what Christine Fitzgerald told me about her experience and what Diana said to her.
Diana was under intense surveillance by MI5 and MI6 at home and when she travelled outside the UK. Now, yesterday you made this interesting comment that she was the most photographed woman in the world.
While she was alive.
While she was alive. But the route in Paris, which is going through, you know, the biggest, most famous roads in Paris, is it true to say that there is not 1 single second of video footage from any CCTV camera?
It is indeed, yeah. There are 10 known cameras that were lining the route that night. But they were all, now we know officially from Lord Stevens' report, that all of those cameras were pointing inwards towards the buildings that housed them. So none of them were pointing towards the road. So therefore we have, allegedly, we have no footage whatsoever of Diana's journey or of the crash itself.
There's one photo of Dodie with Diana Would you say that that is a photo that was taken on the actual last fatal
Yeah,
journey?
that's a photo of them leaving the Ritz, yeah, I think. I would say so, yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about these photos by the paparazzi, because presumably that's been photographed from the back of a motorcycle.
Possibly, or by one of the paparazzi outside the Ritz when they left the Ritz that night.
Okay, so you would normally see a seatbelt going across somebody's shoulder because Diana's sitting in the rear seat, and therefore the seatbelt would be coming from here and going across. There's no seatbelt there.
No, we know for sure now that none of the occupants were wearing their seatbelts, which is odd, really. But certainly in Diana's case, it's very strange because the minute news of her death reached Britain, all of her closest friends started to say, you know, why wasn't she wearing a seatbelt? It had become a religion for her to wear a seatbelt. She always wore her seatbelt. It was an obsession for her. But now we know, strangely, from Lord Stevens' report, again, that Diana's seatbelt in particular was jammed in the retracted position. That is a quote, verbatim, from Lord Stevens' report. Diana's seatbelt, the rear right seatbelt, was jammed in the retracted position, so she was unable to put her seatbelt on. Even though the others may have been able to, she was unable to. So that's just an interesting point that's come out of the report.
After Prince Eddie learned of the bloodthirsty campaign of murder unleashed by the Masonic Monarchy and saw the horrific photos of Mary Kelly and her friends in newspapers, he had a nervous breakdown at Sandringham. Sandringham was the birthplace of Princess Diana. When Prince Eddie learned of the evil partial lobotomy performed on his young Catholic wife, it was the final nail in the coffin for his sanity. However, the Masonic murderers had not completed their task. Lord Salisbury, the Prime Minister, now ordered Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill to kill Prince Eddie's wife and also their illegitimate bastard child. Luckily, Annie Crook escaped into the hinterland of obscure poverty. She gave her child, Alice Crook, to the artist friend of Prince Eddie, Walter Sickert, who moved to Dieppe in France. A romance eventually developed, and Walter Sickert married the young Alice Crook. They eventually had a child, a baby son, who is Joseph Sickert, the man who kept the diaries of Inspector Abberline and the truth about the Jack the Ripper murders secret for 5 decades. Still, the devilish cover-up plan had not ended. Prince Eddie himself then became the victim of a royal conspiracy. The Earl of Strathmore, who owned the huge Glamis Castle, was employed to imprison young Prince Eddie. The royal family lied to the entire world and announced Prince Eddie's death on the 14th of January 1892, whilst secretly keeping him prisoner in hidden chambers at Balmoral and eventually later at Glamis Castle. Balmoral Castle sits by the River Dee, just north of Lochnagar, 9 miles west of Ballater. Balmoral has 25,000 private acres of forest and deer parks, all maintained at the public's expense. It was here, at Balmoral, a Scottish stronghold standing nearly 1,000 feet above sea level, that was chosen as the place where Prince Eddie would be murdered. Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill and his coach driver, John Netley, were dispatched to Balmoral, where they pushed the young prince off a cliff. Amazingly, Prince Eddie survived the murder attempt and 2 days later crawled back to the gates of Balmoral, a shattered and broken man, the heir to the throne completely heartbroken at having his young wife lobotomized and separated from his only child. The 13th Earl of Strathmore made a pact with the royal family. In exchange for keeping Prince Eddie imprisoned at his Glamis castle, one of his daughters would marry a future King of England. Glamis Castle has more than 100 rooms and many secret chambers. Shakespeare wrote about how Macbeth committed murder in the Great Hall. Glamis Castle is one of the most haunted places on earth. On the floor of King Malcolm's room, there was an indelible blood stain which would not be washed away. The royal family eventually boarded the floor over. It was here, at Glamis Castle, that Prince Eddie, his spirit broken, was imprisoned for the rest of his life. He died eventually in 1933, 41 years after the royal family had officially proclaimed him dead. His mother, Queen Alexandra, visited Prince Eddie just once. She took a photo of her son and sent it to her sister, who was the Empress of Russia. For the first time on film, we can now see this photo, a picture of a broken-hearted man imprisoned against his will, sitting alone in a small chamber, painting pictures which no one would ever see. Prince Eddie should have been king, but instead became a prisoner of the royal family. Rumours of a secret prisoner at Glamis Castle circulated amongst the staff for decades after. This was not the first time the royal aristocratic elite had imprisoned one of their own at Glamis Castle. According to official records, in October 1821, a son was born to the 11th Earl of Glamis. Because of royal inbreeding, the baby was hideously deformed. His parents, in a typically aristocratic, cruel manner, refused to announce the birth of their child as a future earl. Their son was badly deformed, resembling an egg with a hairy face and incredibly muscular arms. His parents illegally registered the baby as dead at birth. The son was never given an official name, even though he lived for more than 50 years, bricked up in a chamber, being fed via a slit in a stone wall. Rumours of the so-called Glamis monster persisted right up until the middle of the 20th century. The Glamis monster was in actual fact great-uncle to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The pact made between the royal family and the Earl of Strathmore was eventually fulfilled. In exchange for illegally imprisoning young Prince Eddie, a daughter of one of the Earls of Strathmore would marry a future King of England. The girl born in 1900 and groomed to fulfill the pact was Elizabeth Marguerite, who married the future King George VI. King George's real name was Albert. He was Provisional Grand Master Mason of Middlesex and was installed as Grand Master of Scotland by a Masonic lodge which met from time to time at Glamis Castle. In 1936 he became king, and his wife became the beloved Queen Mother of Queen Elizabeth II. She recently died after several whole-body blood transfusions, and, unlike the death of Princess Diana, the Buckingham Palace flag was lowered to half-mast immediately following the Queen Mother's death. The Queen Mother, who had spent much of her childhood in the haunted halls of Glamis Castle, went to her grave with the royal spin machine in full swing, hiding the macabre secret to why she had been chosen as queen by King George VI. Their daughter, Elizabeth Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, whose family had invented the fake British name of Windsor to hide their German bloodline, was coronated in the bastardized version of King Solomon's occult ceremony at Westminster Abbey in 1953. The payoff for the Spencer-Churchill family was self-evident. Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill's son, Winston, was made Prime Minister, and in 2 generations to come, a Spencer girl, the young, innocent, virginal Diana, would be groomed from birth to serve the royal oligarchy and marry the bachelor Prince Charles. The legacy of the Jack the Ripper murders continued. The Spencer-Churchill family eventually received an immense payment from the newly formed National Lottery in Britain. Winston Churchill was theatrically trained by his father to give speeches in the House of Commons in the exact same fake statesman-like style his father, Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill, had used. In fact, some of the most important speeches of Winston Churchill were actually re-recorded by an actor, and it is these fake speeches which are often played on radio and television. Winston Churchill often visited Azni in Morocco, where he would bugger young Arabian boys whilst writing his memoirs, completely exonerating his father's memory in a sycophantic fake biography. Princess Diana's branch of the Spencer family was described in the media as a family which had always served the British monarchy. It is clear that the Spencer family had clearly been chosen as the genetic material from which a future heir to the British throne would come. Before marrying the virginal and innocent Princess Diana, Prince Charles had had affairs with both of Diana's sisters. Princess Diana had been born on the royal Sandringham estate. Diana was psychologically groomed to breed a future heir to the throne. In Diana's own words, once she had given birth to an heir and a spare, the cruel-hearted Saxe-Coburg dynasty returned to their evil ways and ostracised Diana, eventually stripping Diana's HRH title. Following Diana's appearance on the BBC's Panorama programme, where she criticised the royal family, British military intelligence were ordered to plan a brutal car accident which would kill the People's Princess.